Right, guys, the BBC was running pure damage control for the government against its own MPs earlier today. As some of you might know, 60 or more Tory MPs have actually written to Boris Johnson telling him to start opening the country or face the chance of losing when it comes to votes in Parliament. Obviously, 60 is enough to swing it so the government could lose a vote on legislation, obviously if Labour grew a spine or spot the chance to take a party political shot. This is of course not guaranteed because the opposition at this point really doesn't exist. But the group of MPs trying to tell Boris Johnson to wind his neck in are actually being led by Steve Baker, the Brexiteer and former leader of the ERG, who appeared on the Today programme this morning talking about his letter to the Prime Minister. Of course, being a Tory MP, he's not saying anything controversial during this interview. In fact, he's using the government's own words and conditions for easing restrictions. Shit, he even uses the BBC's own love of the vaccine against them when he points out what the BBC have said about it being some game changer, which I'm sure all of you have heard them screaming about for months at this point. The reason I'm making this video is not their love of the vaccine or anything like that, it's the way that the BBC host conducts himself when dealing with the suggestions coming out of Steve Baker's mouth. I get he is meant to challenge what is being said by guests, but he acts like ending the lockdown is a personal attack on him. Or maybe he just knows it's a personal attack on the mainstream media's ratings. Let's be honest, the BBC have seen increased viewing figures during this shit show, or at least they did at the start. And no doubt they likely want that to continue. It is the only reason I can think of for what sounds like almost anger in his responses to Steve Baker. Now, from what I can tell, Steve Baker is simply trying to get the economy going again, and actually wants a new health act put in place that forces ministers to justify the actions that they take that will affect our lives, or at least do a cost-benefit analysis on what they plan to do. These suggestions here are obviously good things, and it's good to hear an MP saying it, even if I don't agree with all that he has to say or even the time frame that he gives. Myself, I would go much faster, as in open up right now, but that is just me. The issue I have here is what seems like hatred towards anyone going against the narrative. This is something we have seen on social media. And I've got to say, this BBC shitweasel appears to be guilty of it in this case. Here, take a listen to it for yourself and let me know what you think.
Time to reclaim our freedoms, to protect ourselves from the whims of ministers who at a moment's notice can switch off our ability to go out, to marry, to visit family. That's the view of Steve Baker, the Conservative MP, writing in today's Daily Telegraph. He's one of the leaders of a group of more than 60 MPs, piling pressure on the Prime Minister to commit to a firm timetable for ending lockdown, given the government has achieved its target of vaccinating the 4 most vulnerable groups by the deadline it set itself. Schools must reopen by March the 8th. Pubs and restaurants should reopen for Easter, and a total lifting of restrictions should be there by May. Those are some of the specific demands. Steve Baker, Deputy Chair of the COVID Recovery Group, is on the line. Good morning to you, Steve Baker.
Good morning.
The Foreign Secretary has called your target arbitrary, says the ending of the lockdown should be evidence-led. It should depend on rates, on what the virus does, not dates that you've plucked out of the diary. He's right, isn't he?
Well, if we were talking about something arbitrary, then of course the criticism would be correct. But we're not talking about something arbitrary, and there's no question of just plucking dates out of the diary. It's simply wrong. The reality is that what we've said is intimately connected with the vaccine rollout plan, and that's something to be celebrated. We know these vaccines work. Your own bulletin is leading with the success of the Pfizer vaccine. The AstraZeneca vaccine is only being rolled out because it's safe and effective. And that's why we've said now that the top 4 groups are vaccinated, accounting for 88% of COVID deaths. That's why the government should now be opening schools, because we can't afford to be cavalier about the harm to children. And we've said that our other restrictions which remain in place should be safe and should be proportionate, rather, to the harms which COVID is then capable of causing, bearing in mind the accelerating number of people vaccinated. Likewise, hospitality, by Easter, we'll be looking at 2/3 of groups 1 to 9 vaccinated, and therefore the harms that COVID is capable of causing will be again substantially diminished. And for hospitality, you're either open at Easter or you're not. It's a major time of the year for hospitality, so it's very important that government is it takes note of the harms caused to hospitality by being kept closed. And then, of course, by 1st of May, we will have vaccinated all of the top 9 groups, which, remember, includes people under 50 who are clinically extremely vulnerable and others with underlying health
But
conditions.
there's still quite a lot we don't know, isn't there? For example, the extent to which vaccinated people can pass on the virus. We don't have definitive data about how much of the drop in infections we've seen is vaccine and how much lockdown. The Prime Minister was very cagey about that, and we haven't really seen whether it's the vaccinations which are doing this. And you want this to be the last lockdown, right? So aren't you making that a less likely outcome by forcing the issue? If that's what you really want, then it's worth waiting.
Well, of course, what we want is to make this one the last lockdown. I think that's what everybody wants. But the key test here is the vaccine's ability to break the link between cases and hospitalisations and deaths. And I think that's what we're going to see. I think we're quite certain about that. And, I do feel entitled to rely on some of the things which have been said, like Nadhim Zahawi confirming that we will have vaccinated the top 9 groups by the end of April. So I do think this is absolutely the right starting point. As our letter makes very, very clear, the onus is on ministers to justify the proportionality of any measures that stay in place. And if I may, I just draw your attention to the Treasury Select Committee report, which is out today on the economic impact of coronavirus, makes some recommendations on gaps in support, but also on economic analysis. It says that we're very disappointed that the Treasury's not produced the analysis that we think it should. And we say without it, the impression is that government is making important decisions without proper regard to all their impacts, both on health and the economy.
Right. But
the report goes on in that manner. So what I've been saying today is we need a new Public Health Act to make sure we get the proper votes on amendable motions with cost benefit available to members of Parliament so they can be confident ministers are doing the right thing.
I just wonder what you're trying to achieve here, because you know full well that Boris Johnson is a well-known libertarian by persuasion. He doesn't want to be doing this, does he? And if he's not doing it, it must be because he's got some very good reasons not to, because he doesn't want to. You said back in November, for example, we were over the peak. You've been wrong before. He doesn't want to overpromise and underdeliver, which has been the problem before.
Well, there's a great deal in the question you just asked me, but one of the things I would say is I don't think very many people saw the new variant with its transmissibility coming. And I think anyone can go and look at the case data and see we were over a peak.
Right, so things can come along, so that which means that having a firm timetable is a very risky and ill-advised thing to do.
So, Simon, the firm timetable follows on from the deployment of the vaccine, and we can be highly confident about the deployment of that vaccine now. And yes, there are, of course, going to be some questions. But the point is, we have been saying all along as the COVID recovery group that we wanted to be evidence-led, that we wanted ministers to show the effectiveness and proportionality of the measures that they're taking. The Treasury Select Committee, on a cross-party basis, including members who do not agree with me on COVID, have come up with a unanimous report which says very similar things on cost-benefit analysis, very similar things on the need for multidisciplinary expert advice. And what I think Matt and others need to answer in government is, are they being properly prudent about all of the costs of lockdown?
But there is no. But it's a mistake, isn't it, to think there's a trade-off between the health outcome and the economic one. What we've seen is that the worse the health outcome, the worse the economy, and that's why the UK is at the bottom of both of those leagues out of developed nations. I just wonder if you don't get what you want, or what. Last month you threatened. You threatened the Prime Minister, saying his leadership was on the table. The debate will become about the PM's leadership. Do you reiterate that?
No, so that's not what I'm saying today. Today I'm saying is we need a new Public Health Act which will force the government to prove the proportionality of the measures that it leaves in place. That's what MPs signed up to in this letter. I'm extremely clear that what we need is Boris Johnson at his absolute best. I've never thought of him as a libertarian. I'm sure he has a wild and uncontrollable spirit. But Boris is a pragmatist, and he's trying to do his very, very best. But as we grope our way back towards the light and life and getting on with rebuilding our society from what has been an historic hit by any standard, we do need to remember that, yes, coronavirus cases getting too high would hit the economy irrespective of policy, but also we need to remember that livelihoods affect lives. We do know that if people are in poverty, that shortens their lives.
Okay.
And so we need to have a much, much better idea of the proportionality and effectiveness of the measures that ministers propose. And the Treasury Select Committee has agreed with me on a cross-party basis. I'm very pleased now that the government needs to bring forward that analysis.
Steve Baker, many thanks.
Right, so as you heard there was nothing in that the BBC should be against, not even in the slightest if you ask me. Obviously, there'll be some of it that you guys won't be very happy with, and I myself don't like a fair old portion of it, but at the end of the day, the BBC should be fully behind it. That is, of course, if they were impartial and actually worth a wet wank on a Sunday morning. Let's be honest, they're really not. The only reason I can think of him acting like that towards Steve Baker and anything that he's come out with is because the BBC and this snivelling shitweasel want these restrictions to continue. They don't care what happens, they want to keep it all locked down and everyone sat at home watching the BBC with the police forcing them to do it. It's clear to me and should be clear to anyone else that is what this BBC host is doing it for. He had absolutely no reason to act like that at all. I mean, let's be honest, Steve Baker's not just saying let's throw open the country right now and go back to normal instantly. He's saying now that everything the government said has been done, let's start getting back to normal and let's make sure they can't do it again. I don't understand how the BBC find that to be controversial. Then again, let's be honest, they don't care if the government wastes our money, which is also another thing that Steve Baker was talking about. Now, to save myself reading through any of his article that they were talking about in this clip, I actually put snippets up a bit on the screen, as most of you would have noticed. If you haven't, you can go back and watch it, pause it, and give it a read if you need to. To be honest, most of what Steve Baker said, I don't give a flying fuck about. At the end of the day, I just thought it was worth calling out this BBC shitweasel and his blatant anger towards Steve Baker, or at least in my mind. Like I said, let me know what you think. Do you think the BBC host got a bit salty with him? And also, while you're doing that, remember to check out my Odyssey account, which is linked down below, along with BitChute, Gab and the rest of them. I did mean to do a live stream last night, but I didn't get time. Hopefully I'll have some time to do one later. I will definitely get one done this week, and there are plans to start doing them every day or every couple of days. I will keep you updated on that, but it's a matter of time at this point.